Hey everybody, it's Sam over at the Foot Whisperer Reflexology Institute here with another foot reading video. We got some new pictures in. It's been a whirlwind after the UK tour, but so glad to be back into the swing of things, getting everything back into a normal realm of function, and this is definitely therapy for me. So let's jump into the foot reading aspect, and here we go. So we got some screen share happening. And we are there. So, as most of you know, these foot reading videos are based on the photos that you send to me. Yes, these are live videos, and the pictures are normally sent by people who are interested in the foot reading aspect of the work, and my students as well. So very, very excited to have those of you who are on the channel with us. I am monitoring the live chat, but if you have a question or a comment about what you're about to see, please feel free. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your questions are, and we can answer them as we go. But just as a general rule, the Facebook group that these assessments are kind of based in. We have a presence online, the Foot Reading and Reflexology online community group. That is really where a lot of this goes down from an assessment standpoint. We focus on visually, texturally, assessing the feet to unpack the owner's personality as well as physical and mental stress. It's all very, very fascinating and exciting, and we're going to show you how I would do that in a consultation for a client right now. So it starts with assessment, and then we get into the consultation approach. So once we assess the reflexes, how do we start to work with the client and communicate what we're finding, validate or invalidate the findings, explore what things look like from a conversational perspective. You know, it's one thing to have a definition of what something could mean, but to put it in a context with timeline, you know, that's really where the magic happens. Then we really focused on the application. Once we understand what the markers in the feet mean, how do we then take that from point A to point B, give them something to work on lifestyle-wise, suggest pointed methods of therapeutic intervention, either through referring out to other professionals or, you know, more targeted forms of body work, you know, validating whether reflexology is a good fit for them, something like that. Okay. So let's talk about some context. We're going to focus on the smaller details, then we're going to go to the bigger themes, and then the actionable steps. And this is really kind of how we move through the series. We're going to focus on a lot of very small details, in this video. Then we're going to go on to the bigger themes as far as what these smaller details add up to, and then talk about some actionable steps, because it's not just about, you know, finding the marker and decoding the meaning and being right all the time. Sometimes what you would think a marker means is actually not correct for the person, or they may interpret it a certain way, and we want to take those interpretations that make sense to them and say, okay, based on this meaning that we've come to an agreement on, what then are we going to do about what the body is asking for? Okay. So let's take a look at the feet that I showed you at the beginning of this video. And this is the dorsal aspect of the feet that we are going to unpack. And there are some twists and turns that I won't tell you about for now, but I definitely wanted to look at the lighter side of things before we delve deeper into the sole or under surface, because there's a lot that we can see just on the dorsal surface that we will then validate through the plantar surface or the sole of the foot. Okay. So let's just drill down some of the little aspects, the baby aspects of some of these markers, and I'll kind of give you my 2 cents on them. So high-strung. When I say high-strung, Sam, what do you mean high-strung? Let's talk about this. So the high-strung nature of this individual is really found prominently in the fact that their big toe tendons are popped. And what I mean by popped is that the tendons have so much physical tension that they have risen to the surface, and you can see almost if you wanted to take your finger and pluck them, you could. It's the band is so taut. This means that the person is high-strung both physically, especially in the neck space, because that big toe represents the neck, but it is going into the ball of the foot, which would be that upper back chest space, so that group of muscles that connects the neck to the upper back, that upper trap space, that levator scapula, all of those musculatures, the top of the erector spinae group. There's so much happening here from a back of the neck into the shoulder blade space from a tension standpoint. That's really where we see a lot of tension happening. But then mentally and emotionally, it's just this person has pulled so tightly on their thoughts and feelings. They're trying to clamp down so strong and create so much order that it's really detrimental at this point to their freedom when we think of their personality aspect as being too high strung. Then we have emotional pressure as well as heart pressure. And when we think of pressure in the heart, we can always turn to the bunion area for that. We can see that the ball of the foot and the bunion space is definitely pronounced. Not as easy to see with the lighting on this picture, but we can definitely see the shape of that zone 2 space being very forward. And this tells us that there's an increase of emotional pressure, not necessarily on the surface, not something that you can really see. You see that rigidness, that tightness, that high strungness on the surface, but underneath, you really get a feeling for it. There's so much bottling of feeling that's happening. This could result in physical blood pressure issues when we see this vertical zone 1, horizontal zone 2, things that are in line with the big toe, but also in the ball of the foot, that bunion space. When we start to see activity here, especially when it starts to increase in size, especially when it starts to increase in pain, callousing, tension, that tells us that there's stuff happening with the actual heart. There's stuff that is happening blood pressure wise, both from a physical level, but then also just from a heart space pressure level internally. They're just keeping too much in the chest, and we want to remind them to discharge that. Then we have markers for mental stress. What is a good marker for mental stress? Again, a little bit hard for you to see here coloration-wise, but I'd like you to bring your attention to this dip that we have in the big toenail on the left side. That tells us a lot about somebody's stress from a mental perspective. So go the nails, so go the mind. It really tells us a lot from just how much has been on this person's thought space. And we can see that it is a indent, so the mind has been a little bit deficient. They've started to get not necessarily depressed, but there is a depression. Maybe there was a time where they just felt very mentally fatigued, couldn't handle it, couldn't process it. There's just a lot happening in the mental space that leaned towards the more tired and worn out side. Then we get into a marker for weak pelvis. And again, just drilling down all of these things, there's just a lot happening. So wanted to outline some of these before we get into the underside. But here we have the marker for the weak pelvis. And what this looks like from a physical perspective is we see kind of that gas pedal foot formation, which I talk about in my book on foot reading, but specifically at the ankles. You can see that the ankles are hyper flexed. We can see that it almost looks like they're pushing down on the gas, but it's creating this hypermobility in the ankles. Like if they were to take a step, this area looks very wobbly, hyperextended. You can also see the tendons are slightly raised. There's just this tension weakness play that's happening in the pelvic area that's not necessarily conducive for things like reproductive wellness, but also low back and hip stability. When we think of the weak pelvic reflexes as also that horizontal zone 4, that center of family and relationships, it seems like there's been a little bit of overactivity and underactivity, that the highs and lows in the relationship space. And we want to be aware of that when we start to make mental and emotional interpretations as well of these same physical reflexes. Then let's talk about the idea of a false arch. Now, if you were to just look at the picture, you might say, oh, this person has a very high arch. You can see that the arch has a very strong curve to it. But in my experience, especially since we're seeing a lot of tension, but also hypermobility in the ankle, this could be a false arch, and we won't know. And this is the danger of looking at pictures as opposed to doing a live consult, is I would have the client stand flat on the floor or stand with their feet flat on the floor, or I would have them just walk. I would watch them walk physically barefoot, and that would give me an idea of whether or not the arch is truly tight or whether it's false. Because sometimes people present with a very high arch, but the minute that they put pressure on their feet, the arch completely collapses, and it's what I call a false arch, or it presents as hyperactive, but it's actually underactive. So we can see that this person is, again, presenting as hyperactive, presenting as overly tight, presenting as having a very taut spine, presenting as being very, very on edge, but we can't validate whether this is truly the case unless we had them live in person. So just fun stuff to note. Okay, here we are for the underside of the foot. Now, some of you might be freaking out at this point, like, oh my God, this doesn't seem like the same pair of feet. Holy crap, there's so much going on here. Sam, I have no idea where to focus first. And I completely understand that because there is a lot happening here, and we can definitely break that down step by step. But first, I'd like you to appreciate the contrast. How much is happening underneath the surface versus how much is happening on the dorsal surface. Dorsal surface tells us that, she's tight, that she's, high-strung, that she has a lot of physical tension, mental fatigue. But then we look at what's happening underneath all of that, and we can see a very different side of the story. We can see that there's just aspects that we haven't really considered. Okay. So let's drill down the markers. Stagnation. For those of you who have already picked up on the color difference, you can see a lot of yellowing in the feet here. And this is primarily because of the layers of built up callus tissue. Now, calluses won't always turn yellow, but when they do turn yellow, it's fascinating because from a reflex standpoint, it means that there's a lot of physical stuck congestion lymphatically, but also scar tissue wise happening in the body. The fascia is just old, very much like the leaves will turn color in fall when moisture and nutrients have been drained from them. That's exactly what's happening here in the reflexes. Just that stagnation is very physically present. But then we can also relate this to the mental emotional aspect. We can see that a large amount of the callusing is centered in zone 2 in the ball of the foot, just between the arch and the toes. That ball of the foot being so yellow means that there's a lot of stagnant feeling. There's a lot of stagnant emotion that this person is dealing with that needs to be released and circulated. But we can also see that that stagnation is spreading. It's kind of in the big toe area. It's kind of at the base of the toe. It's kind of in the heel. It's kind of all over. And that tells me that there's just a lot of physical but internal stagnation happening as well. We overall just need to vent a lot of this physical and internal tension. There's also a metabolism flux that's been happening, and this is really fascinating because a lot of people have been asking me about thyroid questions on the Facebook group. And here's a really great example of the metabolism flux. So notice the thyroid reflex at the neck of the big toe, which is traditionally where it's located, is wider, thicker, and denser on the right side of the client's feet versus the left side of the client's feet. So right foot has that puffy thyroid. You can see that there's peeling or shedding happening on both. But that increase of size from one side to the other, that's not a good thing. That means that the body is undergoing ups and downs metabolism-wise, and that can be slightly dangerous. We can also validate that because we can see that the horizontal zone 4 lower digestive markers, the lines are going horizontally on the right side, but then they're starting to go diagonally and somewhat up and down on the left. That tells me that there's a pattern of holding on to the gut and then kind of frantically releasing the gut, or there's a packing and storing of nutrients, and then there's a massive flush of nutrients. So it seems like this person is undergoing periods of overeating and then undereating, overeating, undereating, and that's messing with some of the metabolism stuff. lower GI weakness overall, besides the line orientation, we can see that just like what was presented to us with the dorsal pelvic reflexes being overstretched or overextended, here we can see a mirroring weakness. But I also wanted you to see this particular, oh, my battery is running low. Excuse me while I plug this in, because that would be very embarrassing if my thing decided to poop out on me right in the middle of this presentation, which hopefully will not happen over the next couple seconds. And we're good. Fabulous. Okay. Anyway, back to that. This is live, people. Happy foot reading video. So when we look at lower GI weakness, whenever we see this marker, this aspect of the little freckles around the feet, those are really significant because it indicates where an area has been burnt out. It indicates an area that's naturally going to be prone to weakness. And specifically, we see that it's here in the lower GI on the right side. I'd specifically call this small intestine. So there is a history of absorption issues that I would definitely be aware of. So it seems like part of the metabolism flux issue is that this person has that inability to naturally absorb things the way that they're presented to the body. So we need to coach them a little bit on just eating the proper variety of foods, not just the way that not just like eating vegetables over, meats and processed carbs, but also making sure that the food that is being eaten is very broken down, because the stomach is very sensitive. And when I say stomach, I say that as a general term to clients who don't necessarily know the specific anatomy. But when we look at the small intestine is not working at high capacity. So we need to present things to the small intestine that are easy to absorb and what we would call bioaccessible. Then we can see multiple signs of joint issues here. First and foremost is going to be the shoulders. The shoulder reflexes are very prominent. There's also that stagnation aspect. Then we see the knee reflexes. That proximal head of the fifth metatarsal is also very prominent. That's something that is a sign of just joint pressure in the knees. And then we can also see the lower body being stagnant, but also somewhat dry, a little bit difficult to see in the picture as well, unless you zoomed in, but I had the ability to zoom in on these pictures and really dissect it. If we wanted to even go up further back into the big toes, we could see that the base of the neck is also slightly stagnant and compromised. So multiple signs of joint issues because of that, and that's mostly because of the stagnation that's present. So if we wanted to focus on something like a yoga, something that's moving to the body, something that's constantly using up the stores of energy that seem to be pocketed away in the joints, we want to make sure that the body has a chance to use what has been given as opposed to just saving it for later. And then reproductive stress as a whole. Now, this isn't one particular marker. This is going to be a series of markers. When we see zone 4 weakness in the lower digestive space, but also that dorsal ankle that we talked about on the dorsal side, both of those can indicate zone 4 weakness as a whole, and the reproductive reflexes are in zone 4. So all of this is pointing towards a history of reproductive stress because of the underlying absorption issues and because the joints are physically stagnant. When the body is hoarding resources like this, it's not going to be shedding things appropriately. And this includes detox, but this also includes, from a feminine perspective, the monthly cycle. So the reproductive aspect is going to be something that I would also inquire about because of multiple things that we've seen already. And you can see how we're picking up the smaller markers, but then we're also starting to decode the bigger picture here, which is looking like digestive weakness leading to joint stagnation, which is manifesting in a bunch of different issues, including but not limited to reproductive stress. Okay, here's another look, and I really wanted to show you this image because it does give us a different perspective of what's going on. You can really see the color contrast as well. The yellowing of that callousing is coming through very strongly, but there are also some things that that we can kind of pick apart here. So the color contrast is a big thing with the yellowing, but then we can also see flickers of red, but overall the feet are generally have a pallor to them. In addition to that, there are air markers present. So let's talk about those. We can see this largely in the skin. We can see this in the heel, that there seems to be waves or just space in between the skin and the structural tissues of the feet. This indicates weakness or not having enough resources. We saw that in horizontal zone 4 as well. We can also see the dryness over the joint reflexes in the upper body and lower body. So the heel and the ball of the foot both demonstrating that dryness over the callousing, as well as the base of the big toe, and the heel space being kind of depleted as a whole. All of this is pointing towards weakness in the joints. The color contrast is telling us that the joints are weak and they're also stagnant. So this has been a long time period of, I can't go to the gym because I feel like crap after I go to the gym, but I'm not exercising anywhere else because I hurt when I exercise. And that balance is so tricky to play with, but it all goes back to the fuel source also not being present. We can see also that digestive freckle on the left foot is waving hi to us as well. So if the fuel isn't being taken and assimilated, then the energy is going to be low and the joints won't have the fuel that they need to do their job. So if they're having a bad digestion week, then they're going to be having a bad joint week. But the remedy for that is to eat better and move, not just eat better, not just move, because we can't ask them to perform if the fuel tank is empty. But then if the fuel tank is full and they're not performing, then there isn't a flow or a chain of utilization of resources. So that's something to consider as well. Okay, so let's put all of this together, shall we? Let's talk about the physical. So on the physical side, we have stagnant joints. We've talked about that. We have digestive weakness, and then we have overall signs of fatigue and the air markers present. On a mental emotional level, we have a suit of armor that's developed. And I really like this analogy because you can think of the yellowing of the calluses as kind of like rust on the armor. The calluses would be the armor itself. It would be the rigidity in the tissues. It would be the emotional defensiveness. It would be that internal not necessarily fight instinct, but that protective instinct. And then the yellowing of the stagnation, meaning that the armor has become terribly outdated and it's not being oiled or moved the way that it should. And so they're kind of caught between, do I even use the armor anymore? Is it even valid anymore? And the answer is no. Okay. So that was a little weird. It needs to let go of all that armor and then understand that life is not a threat. That's basically the way that I would kind of capture that need to both protect but also to release. That balance between, yes, there is a need for tension. There is a need for the ability to protect ourselves from things that are stressful to us. But on the other hand, life is not a threat and should not be viewed as evil at every corner. That just plays havoc on the nervous system. So methods of balancing, just to wrap this all up into a statement, the stagnation needs to be released with awareness-based exercises. So yoga or Tai Chi would be excellent, paired with reflective modalities and or counseling. The body will be able to release inner and outer restrictive patterns. This statement I really want to drive home because it's not just about the physical movement, it's also about the internal state that's stagnant as well. So we can't just ask this person to stretch it out. Although there may be some tissue memory that comes to the surface that releases the internal state, there needs to be a conscious reflection of why the armor was put on to begin with. Yeah. So the reflective modalities and maybe seeing a professional or maybe even just finding a friend to talk with on a regular basis, that internal side of the work will help to release the physical patterns as well. Then we need to fuel this releasing process by giving the body bioaccessible food, soup, stews that are nutrient dense on a regular basis. Symptoms such as cycle issues, restless sleep, another hormone issue related to stress, joint pain because of the stagnation, and headaches because there was a lot happening around the big toe, both tension-wise and stagnation-wise, as well as fatigue, will subside as an expression of being on the right track. So we're taking all of the markers that we found, we're putting the bigger story together, and then we're making a suggestion based on what we've seen in the interpretation of the reflexes thus far. Make sense? So if you want to learn more about foot reading and talk with some other foot readers, talk about other interpretations of what things could mean, the Foot Reading and Reflexology online community is the place to go. That's the group that I run. We have over 1,900 members right now. It's growing super fast, and I'd love to keep the conversation going through there. So let's escape that and flip around. Okay, so that was really fun. That was a foot reading video, a little bit of tech glitches, so apologize, but thank you for your patience. If you have any questions on foot reading, if you'd like to submit your pictures for foot reading videos, or if you'd like to maybe learn foot reading, I published a book. I have an online course. There are so many other resources out there right now from people like Jane Sheehan, Chris Stormer, Moshi, Sue Ricks, other foot readers that are publishing content on a regular basis about how we can look at a person, both physically and mentally and emotionally, from the lens of the extremity. So I hope that you found this video valuable. Please stay tuned, subscribe, like, share. Shoot me an email at sam@footwhisperer.com and use the resources in the description in order to connect with me. And I will see you for the next foot reading video.